Occult Science, an Outline, by Rudolf Steiner. Preface. An investigator who undertakes to present certain results of scientific spiritual research of the nature recorded in this volume must, above all, be prepared to find that this mode of inquiry is, at present, almost universally deemed impossible. For the subsequent pages recount matters concerning which those presently esteemed as rigorous thinkers assert will likely remain forever indeterminable by human intelligence. One who comprehends and respects the reasons prompting many an earnest individual to assert this impossibility would gladly endeavor, repeatedly, to demonstrate the fundamental misunderstandings underlying the conviction that human cognition is barred from penetrating superphysical realms. For two primary considerations present themselves for contemplation. First, no human being can, upon deeper reflection, indefinitely ignore the reality that their most critical inquiries concerning the meaning and significance of existence must remain unanswered if access to higher worlds is denied. Theoretically, we may delude ourselves regarding this fact and thereby evade it. Yet the profound depths of our inner life will not tolerate such self-deception. An individual who refuses to heed the promptings arising from these spiritual depths will naturally dismiss any exposition of supersensible worlds. There exist, however, many individuals, and their number is by no means small, who find it impossible to remain deaf to the exigencies arising from the depths of the soul. They are compelled to knock continually at those portals which, in the estimation of others, bar the path to the incomprehensible. Secondly, the assertions of rigorous thinkers must on no account be disregarded. Wherever these claims demand serious consideration, anyone engaged with them will thoroughly appreciate and respect that gravity. The author of this volume would not wish to be perceived as one who casually dismisses the monumental intellectual labor expended in delineating the boundaries of human cognition. This intellectual endeavor cannot be dismissed with superficial remarks concerning academic dogma or similar platitudes. In numerous instances, it originates from an earnest pursuit of knowledge and genuine discernment. Indeed, one must concede even more. Compelling arguments have been advanced to demonstrate that the mode of knowledge currently recognized as scientific is incapable of penetrating supersensible realms, and these arguments are, in a certain sense, irrefutable. To many, it may appear paradoxical that the author of this book freely admits this limitation yet nevertheless endeavors to present expositions regarding supersensible realms. It seems, indeed, almost contradictory that an individual should acknowledge, in some measure, the reasons why knowledge of superphysical worlds is deemed unattainable, and yet continue to discourse upon them. Nonetheless, it is possible to maintain this stance while simultaneously understanding why others perceive it as inconsistent. It is not granted to everyone to participate in the experiences that occur when one approaches supersensible realms with the human intellect. In such circumstances, it becomes apparent that although intellectual proofs may indeed be irrefutable, they are not necessarily decisive in relation to objective reality. Rather than offering abstract theoretical explanations, let us endeavor to clarify this point by means of an analogy. While it is readily conceded that analogies do not constitute proof, this does not prevent them from frequently rendering intelligible that which must be articulated. Human understanding, as it functions in daily life and conventional science, is indeed so structured that it cannot penetrate superphysical worlds. This may be demonstrated beyond any possibility of refutation. Yet, such a demonstration holds no more validity for a certain state of spiritual life than would a proof showing that the natural human eye, by its inherent visual faculty, cannot discern the microscopic cells of a living organism or the composition of remote celestial bodies. Just as the assertion is true and demonstrable that ordinary vision cannot penetrate to the cellular level, so too is the assertion that conventional knowledge cannot penetrate supersensible worlds. And yet, the proof that ordinary vision must halt before the cellular level in no way precludes the investigation of cells. Why, then, should the demonstration that ordinary cognitive faculties must halt before supersensible worlds dictate anything against the possibility of investigating those realms? One can readily appreciate the sentiments that this analogy may evoke in many individuals. It is even understandable that a skeptic who objects to this comparison on the grounds of that intellectual labor does not perceive, even faintly, the profound gravity of that mental effort. And yet, the author is not only thoroughly convinced of that gravity, but is of the opinion that such intellectual work may be numbered among the noblest achievements of humanity. To demonstrate that human vision cannot perceive cellular structures without instrumental aid would surely be a superfluous undertaking. Yet, in rigorous thinking, to become conscious of the nature of that very thought is a necessary endeavor of the intellect. It is only natural that one who devotes himself to such work should fail to observe that reality may refute his conclusions. The preface to this volume is not the appropriate forum to address the numerous critiques of previous editions advanced by those entirely lacking in appreciation of its aims, or who direct unfounded personal attacks against the author. Nevertheless, it must be emphasized that any depreciation of rigorous scientific thought in this book can only be attributed to the author by one who wishes to close their mind to the spirit of its contents. Human cognitive faculties may be enhanced and rendered more powerful, precisely as the physical capacity of vision may be augmented. However, the means for strengthening this cognitive capacity are entirely of a spiritual nature. They are internal processes belonging purely to the realm of the soul. They consist of what is described in this work as meditation and concentration. Ordinary spiritual life is bound to the corporeal instrument. An enhanced spiritual life liberates itself from this constraint. There are contemporary schools of thought to which this assertion must appear entirely nonsensical, seeming to be based solely upon self-delusion. Those who hold this view will find it simple, from their perspective, to demonstrate that all mental and spiritual life is bound up with the nervous system. An individual who adopts the perspective from which this book has been written can thoroughly comprehend such demonstrations. He understands those who argue that only superficiality can assert the existence of any spiritual life independent of the body, and who are firmly convinced that within such experiences of the soul there exists a connection with the nervous system which the dilettantism of occult science merely fails to discern. In this regard, certain entirely comprehensible habits of thought stand in such sharp contradiction to what is described in this book that there is, as yet, no prospect of reaching a mutual understanding with many individuals. At this juncture, the desire must arise that it should no longer be a characteristic of contemporary culture to immediately dismiss as fanciful or visionary any research methodology that differs from its own. Conversely, it is also true today that a significant number of people can appreciate the supersensible method of research as presented in this volume. Individuals who understand that the meaning of existence is not revealed through vague platitudes about the soul, the self, and similar concepts, but can only be realized by genuinely engaging with the findings of superphysical research. Not from a lack of modesty, but with a sense of profound and joyful satisfaction, does the author recognize the necessity for this fourth edition after a comparatively brief interval. The author is not prompted to make this declaration by any lack of modesty, for he is only too deeply conscious of how inadequately even this new edition approximates that outline of a supersensible world conception which it is intended to present. The entire volume has once again been thoroughly revised for this current edition. Considerable supplementary material has been interpolated at critical junctures, and further elucidations have been attempted. Yet, in numerous passages, the author has remained acutely aware of how impoverished the means of expression at his disposal prove to be when compared to the discoveries of superphysical research. Consequently, it was scarcely possible to do more than indicate the path by which one may attain to a conceptual understanding of the cosmic occurrences described herein as the Saturn, Sun, and Moon evolutions. A significant aspect of this subject has been briefly restructured in the present edition. Nevertheless, experiences pertaining to such phenomena diverge so fundamentally from all perceptions within the sensory realm that their exposition demands a perpetual striving after terminology that may be, at least in some measure, adequate. A reader who is disposed to engage with the exposition attempted here will perhaps observe that, regarding many matters incapable of being articulated by mere words, an endeavor has been made to convey them through the very style of the description. This stylistic approach, for instance, differs in the account of the Saturn evolution from that employed for the Sun evolution, and so forth. Substantial complementary and additional material has been incorporated into this edition within the section treating of the perception of the higher worlds. The endeavor has been made to delineate vividly those inner processes of the soul, whereby the cognitive faculty liberates itself from the limitations confining it to the sensory world, thus rendering itself capable of experiencing the supersensible realm. The attempt has been made to demonstrate that these experiences, though attained through exclusively interior paths and disciplines, do not possess a merely subjective significance for the specific individual who acquires them. The exposition seeks to show that within the soul, when divested of its individuality and personal idiosyncrasies, an experience unfolds which every human being may share in identical fashion, provided he actively works upon his own development arising from his subjective experiences. Only when knowledge of supersensible worlds is conceived as possessing this character can it be distinguished from traditional forms of merely subjective mysticism. Of this mysticism it may be said that it remains, after all, more or less a subjective concern of the mystic. The scientific spiritual training of the soul, however, as described herein, strives for objective experiences, the truth of which, although recognized in an entirely inward manner, may yet, for that very reason, be found to be universally valid. This, again, is a point upon which it is exceedingly difficult to reach an understanding concerning many of the habits of thought of our epoch. In conclusion, the author would like to observe that it would be well if even the sympathetic reader of the book would receive its statements precisely as they stand. At the present time, there exists a highly prevalent tendency to assign some historical name to this or that spiritual movement, and to many it is only such a name that seems to render it valuable. But it may be asked, what would the statements in this book gain by being designated Rosicrucian or anything else of the kind? What is of importance is that in this book a glimpse into supersensible worlds is attempted with the means that in our present period of evolution are possible and suitable for the human soul, and that from this point of view the problems of human destiny and human existence are considered beyond the limits of birth and death. It is not a question of an endeavor that shall bear this or that ancient name, but of a striving after truth. On the other hand, expressions have also been employed with hostile intention regarding the conception of the universe presented in this book. leaving out of account that those expressions intended to strike and discredit the author most heavily are absurd and objectively untrue. These formulations are stamped as unworthy by the fact that they disparage an entirely independent search for truth, because the detractors do not judge it upon its own merits, but endeavor to impose upon others, as a judgment of these investigations, erroneous ideas concerning their dependence upon this or that tradition, ideas which they have fabricated themselves or adopted from others without foundation. However necessary these words may be in the face of the numerous attacks upon the author, it is yet repugnant to him in this place to enter further into the matter. Rudolf Steiner, June 1913. Chapter 1. The Character of Occult Science. At the present time, the words occult science are apt to arouse the most diverse feelings. Upon some individuals they operate like a magic charm, as the announcement of something toward which they feel drawn by the innermost powers of their soul. To others, there is in these words something repellent, evoking contempt, derision, or a compassionate smile. By many, occult science is regarded as a lofty goal of human endeavor, the pinnacle of all other knowledge and cognition. Others, who devote themselves with the greatest earnestness and a noble love of truth to that which appears to them genuine science, deem occult science mere idle dreaming and fantasy, belonging to the same category as superstition. To some, occult science is like a light without which life would be valueless. To others, it represents a spiritual danger, calculated to lead astray immature minds and weak souls, while between these two extremes is to be found every conceivable intermediate shade of opinion. Strange feelings are awakened in one who has attained a certain impartiality of judgment in regard to occult science, its adherents, and its opponents, when one observes how individuals, undoubtedly possessed of a genuine feeling for freedom in many matters, become intolerant when they encounter this particular line of thought. And an unprejudiced observer will scarcely fail in this case to admit that what attracts many adherents of occult science, or occultism, is nothing but the fatal craving for the unknown and the mysterious, or even the vague. And he will also be ready to acknowledge that there is much cogency in the reasons advanced against the fantastic and the visionary by serious opponents of the cause in question. In fact, whoever studies occult science will do well not to lose sight of the fact that the impulse toward the mysterious leads many individuals on a vain chase after worthless and dangerous will-o'-the-wisps. Even though the occult scientist keeps a watchful eye on all errors and vagaries on the part of adherents of his views, and on all justifiable antagonism, there are yet reasons that hold him back from the immediate defense of his own efforts and aspirations. These reasons will become apparent to anyone entering more deeply into occult science. It would therefore be superfluous to discuss them here. If they were cited before the threshold of this science had been crossed, they would not suffice to convince one who, held back by an irresistible repugnance, refuses to cross that threshold. But to one who effects an entry, the reasons will soon manifest themselves with unmistakable clearness from within. This much, however, implies that the reasons in question point to a certain attitude as the only correct one for an occult scientist. He avoids, as far as he possibly can, any kind of external defense or conflict, and permits the cause to speak for itself. He simply expounds occult science, and in what it has to say concerning various matters, he demonstrates how his knowledge is related to other departments of life and science, what antagonism it may encounter, and in what manner reality stands witness to the truth of his cognitions. He is cognizant that any attempt at vindication would, owing not solely to prevailing deficiencies in contemporary thought but by virtue of an inherent necessity, inevitably descend into the realm of sophistry and persuasion. Hence, his sole desire is to permit occult science to establish its own validity quite independently. The primary tenet of occult science does not consist in the advancement of hypotheses or opinions requiring empirical proof, but rather in the communication, through a strictly narrative exposition, of experiences encountered in a realm distinct from that which is perceptible to the physical senses. Furthermore, it is of paramount importance that this science delineates the methodologies whereby an individual may personally verify the veracity of these disclosures. For anyone who undertakes a rigorous study of authentic occult science will swiftly perceive that it fundamentally alters the concepts and ideas formed, and legitimately so, within other domains of life. Consequently, an entirely novel comprehension arises regarding what has hitherto been designated as proof. One discerns that in certain spheres such a term divests itself of its customary significance, and that there exist alternative foundations for insight and comprehension beyond proofs of this nature. All occult science germinates from two fundamental premises, which may find fertile soil in any human mind. To the occult investigator, these concepts represent experiential facts, provided the appropriate methodologies are employed. To many, however, these selfsame notions appear as highly contentious assertions, capable of provoking intense disputation, if indeed they are not dismissed outright as demonstrably impossible. These two principles are, first, that behind the perceptible world lies another, an invisible realm, concealed from the physical senses and from intellect bound by those senses. And second, that humanity possesses the capacity to penetrate this unseen world through the cultivation of certain dormant faculties. Certain detractors will assert that no such hidden realm exists, maintaining that the universe perceived through the senses is solitary and absolute. They contend that its enigmas are resolvable solely through its own phenomena. Even if humanity remains far from resolving every existential query, the epoch will assuredly arrive when sensory experience, and the empirical science erected upon it, will provide definitive answers to all such inquiries. Others argue that while one cannot dogmatically deny the existence of an unseen realm behind the visible world, human cognitive faculties are fundamentally incapable of penetrating it. These faculties, they claim, possess immutable boundaries. Faith, propelled by its intrinsic yearnings, may seek sanctuary in such a domain. Yet rigorous science, grounded in verified facts, must remain entirely divorced from it. A third perspective regards it as a species of presumption for humanity to attempt, through independent cognitive efforts, to penetrate a sphere wherein one should renounce all claims to knowledge and rest content with faith. Proponents of this view deem it improper for frail mortals to attempt to intrude upon a realm that ought to remain the exclusive province of religious devotion. Furthermore, it is contended that while collective knowledge of sensory facts is attainable for mankind, any discourse regarding supersensible matters must remain purely a subjective opinion, devoid of any possibility of universally recognized certainty. Numerous other assertions of a similar nature are advanced on this subject. The occult researcher is persuaded that an examination of the visible world presents enigmas to humanity that can never be resolved solely through the phenomena of that world itself. Such resolution will remain impossible, regardless of how advanced empirical knowledge may become. Indeed, visible phenomena, by their very nature, point toward the existence of a concealed realm. He who fails to perceive this willfully ignores the problems that conspicuously emerge from the facts of the sensory world. By refusing to acknowledge these questions, He harbors the illusion that all inquiries may be answered by means of sensory perception. The questions he deigns to pose are indeed resolvable through facts he believes will be uncovered in due course. Every authentic occultist concedes this point. Yet, why should one who raises no questions expect answers on these matters? The occult scientist maintains that such inquiry is innate, representing an entirely legitimate aspiration of the human soul. Science, surely, ought not to be circumscribed by limits that preclude impartial investigation. To the assertion that there exist impassable boundaries to human cognition, which compel humanity to stop short of the invisible world, the occult scientist responds thus. He concedes that it is undoubtedly impossible to penetrate the unseen realm by means of the specific cognitive faculties in question. Whoever considers these to be the sole faculties of the mind must inevitably conclude that humanity is barred from accessing any potentially existing higher sphere. Nevertheless, the occult scientist asserts that the development of a distinct cognitive capacity is entirely possible, and that this alternative faculty leads directly into the unseen world. If this mode of cognition is deemed impossible, one arrives at a perspective from which any reference to an invisible world appears as absolute absurdity. Yet, to an impartial judgment, there can be no rational basis for such an opinion, save for the fact that its adherent remains unfamiliar with this alternative cognitive path. How, indeed, can one formulate a valid opinion upon a subject of which one confesses ignorance? In this regard, occult science must insist upon the principle that individuals should speak only of what they know, and refrain from making assertions concerning matters of which they are ignorant. It can recognize only the right of every individual to communicate personal experiences, not the right of everyone to proclaim the impossibility of that which he does not or refuses to comprehend. The occult scientist disputes no one's right to ignore the invisible world. However, there is no justification for an individual to claim authority not only over what he knows, but also over that which he deems unknowable. To those who contend that penetrating unseen regions constitutes a form of presumption, the occult scientist would merely suggest that such an endeavor is indeed achievable, and that to allow the faculties with which humanity has been endowed to languish, rather than cultivating and employing them, is to commit an offense against one's own nature. Moreover, he who believes that perspectives on the unseen world are of necessity entirely dependent upon subjective opinion and sentiment denies the shared essence of humanity. Although it remains true that each individual must discover illumination within himself, it is equally certain that all who advance sufficiently far along this path arrive at identical, rather than divergent, conclusions. Discrepancies persist only so long as individuals decline to approach these supreme truths via the well-tested path of occult science, choosing instead to pursue avenues of their own design. Authentic occult science readily concedes that only those who have trodden, or at least begun to tread, this path are qualified to recognize its validity. Yet, all who pursue this course will inevitably recognize its authenticity, as seekers have done throughout the ages. The path to occult knowledge will be discovered, at the appropriate juncture, by every individual who perceives within the visible world the immanence of the invisible, or who even dimly divines its presence, and who, conscious of the perfectibility of his cognitive powers, is impelled by the conviction that the concealed may be revealed to him. Whoever is drawn to occult science by such internal experiences will find opening before him not only the prospect of resolving the profound questions that weigh upon him, but also the broader promise of overcoming all that constricts and diminishes his existence. And in a certain loftier sense, it denotes a debilitation of life, indeed a demise of the soul, when an individual is compelled to avert his gaze from, or to disavow the unseen. Truly, under specific circumstances, despair ensues when a man forfeits all hope of having the invisible revealed to him. This spiritual death and despair, in their manifold manifestations, constitute simultaneous inner adversaries to occult science. They emerge when an individual's intrinsic vigor begins to wane. In such a state, if he is to retain any vital force, it must be administered to him from external sources. He perceives the objects, entities, and occurrences that confront his sensory organs, analyzing them solely through the intellect. These external stimuli afford him pleasure and pain, and impel him toward those actions of which he is capable. For a period he may persist in this manner, but at length he must arrive at a juncture where he inwardly perishes. For that which may be extracted from the external world for human sustenance is ultimately finite and becomes exhausted. This assertion does not arise from the subjective experience of a single individual, but rather results from an impartial survey of the entirety of human existence. That which preserves life from depletion resides within the unseen world, deep within the primal roots of existence. Should a person lose the capacity to descend into those depths, thereby failing to perpetually derive fresh vitality therefrom, then ultimately the external world of phenomena will likewise cease to yield anything of a vivifying nature. It is by no means merely the individual and his personal welfare or adversity that are at stake. Through occult science, man acquires the conviction that, from a loftier perspective, the well-being and suffering of the individual are inextricably bound to the fate of the entire cosmos. Through this realization, he perceives that he inflicts an injury upon the whole world and every sentient being therein if he fails to cultivate his inherent faculties in the proper manner. If a man renders his life desolate by severing his connection with the unseen, he not only destroys something within his innermost self, the decay of which may ultimately plunge him into despair, but through his debility, he also poses an obstacle to the evolution of the entire world in which he exists. To be sure, man may delude himself. He may succumb to the belief that nothing invisible exists, and that what is manifest to his senses and intellect comprises the sum total of existence. Yet such an illusion can persist only upon the superficial stratum of consciousness, not in its profounder depths. Feeling and desire do not capitulate to this deceptive creed. They will, in one manner or another, perpetually yearn for the invisible. Should this be withheld, they drive him toward doubt, existential uncertainty, or even utter despair. Occult science, by rendering the unseen manifest, is designed to overcome all hopelessness, vacillation, and despair, everything, in short, that debilitates life and renders it unfit for its requisite service in the universe. The beneficent efficacy of occult science lies in its capacity not merely to satisfy the thirst for knowledge, but to impart fortitude and stability to human existence. The fount from which the occult investigator draws his capacity for labor and his confidence in existence is inexhaustible. Anyone who has once partaken of that source will, upon returning to it, invariably emerge with renewed vigor. There exist those who refuse to entertain any discourse regarding occult science, believing they discern something morbid in the aforementioned assertions. From the perspective of the superficial and external aspects of existence, these individuals are entirely justified. They do not wish to stunt that which life, in its so-called reality, offers. They perceive a certain frailty in man's aversion to reality and his pursuit of well-being in an unseen world, which they equate with the chimerical and the visionary. If we, as occult scientists, wish to avoid lapsing into morbid reverie and weakness, we must concede that such objections are partially warranted. For they are grounded upon a sound judgment that arrives at a partial truth rather than the whole, simply because it does not penetrate to the roots of things, remaining instead upon the surface. Were occult science designed to enfeeble existence and estrange man from genuine reality, such objections would indeed suffice to undermine the very foundation of those who pursue this spiritual path. Yet, even in the face of such criticisms, occult science would err by defending itself in the conventional manner. In this instance, it can vindicate itself only through what it imparts to those who truly comprehend its meaning, namely, through the genuine fortitude and vitality it bestows. Far from weakening life, it fortifies it, equipping man not only with the forces of the manifest world but also with those of the invisible realm, of which the manifest is but the effect. Consequently, it represents not an impoverishment, but an enrichment of life. The genuine occult scientist does not stand aloof from the world. Rather, he is a lover of reality, for he does not seek to enjoy the unseen in some remote, dreamlike state, but finds his fulfillment in channeling into the world continuous currents of force from those invisible sources whence this very world is derived, and by which it must be perpetually fertilized. Numerous obstacles confront those who embark upon the path of occult science. One such impediment arises when an individual, attempting his initial steps, becomes discouraged because he is introduced at the very outset to the intricate details of the supersensible world, which he must master with utmost patience and devotion. A series of disclosures is presented to him concerning the invisible constitution of man, specific occurrences within the realm whose portals are opened by death, and the evolution of humanity, the earth, and the entire solar system. He had anticipated entering the supersensible realm effortlessly, in a single bound. Now he is heard to say, "Everything which I am instructed to study is food for my mind, but leaves my soul cold. I seek the deepening of my soul life. I desire to find myself within. I am seeking that which will lift my soul into the sphere of the divine, leading it to its true home. I do not desire information about the human being and world processes." People who speak in this manner remain unaware that through these very feelings, they obstruct the path to that which they truly seek. For it is precisely, and indeed only, when they assimilate with an open mind in self-surrender and patience what they disparagingly term mere intellectual fodder, that they will discover that for which their souls thirst. The path that leads the soul to union with the divine is that which imparts to it knowledge of the divine works. The elevation of the heart is the direct consequence of acquiring knowledge regarding the creations of the spirit. For this reason, occult science must commence by imparting that knowledge which illuminates the realms of the spiritual world. Accordingly, in this volume, we shall begin with those revelations concerning the unseen worlds that may be disclosed through the methods of occult research. Both the mortal and the immortal aspects of man will be described in their relation to the universe of which he is a member. Thereafter, we shall delineate the methods whereby man may develop those latent cognitive faculties that will conduct him into that higher realm. We shall address these methodologies as extensively as is currently feasible in a treatise of this nature. It might seem logical to assume that these methods ought to be expounded first, as the primary objective would appear to be instructing man in how to attain, through his own faculties, the desired perception of the higher worlds. Many may say, "Of what utility is it to me that others recount what they know of higher worlds? I wish to behold them myself." The reality of the matter is that, for a genuinely fruitful experience of the mysteries of the unseen world, a prior knowledge of certain facts pertaining to that realm is absolutely indispensable. The reasons underlying this necessity shall be sufficiently elucidated in the subsequent discourse. It is an error to assume that the verities of occult science, imparted by those authorized to transmit them prior to any discussion concerning the means of penetrating the spiritual realm itself, can be comprehended and grasped solely through that elevated vision which arises from the cultivation of latent human faculties. Such is not the case. For the investigation and discovery of the mysteries of a supersensible world, this higher perception is indeed indispensable. No individual is capable of uncovering the facts of the invisible world without the clairvoyance that is synonymous with such elevated vision. Yet, once these facts have been discovered and communicated, any person who applies to them the full scope of ordinary intellect and unbiased judgment will be capable of comprehending them and of attaining a profound degree of conviction regarding their validity. He who asserts that these mysteries remain incomprehensible to him does so not because he lacks clairvoyance, but because he has not yet succeeded in activating those cognitive faculties that may be possessed by all, even in the absence of such higher vision. A modern approach to presenting these matters consists in describing them, subsequent to their clairvoyant investigation, in such a manner that they become entirely accessible to the faculty of judgment. Provided that individuals do not close their minds through prejudice, no obstacle remains to obtaining a firm conviction, even without the aid of higher vision. Admittedly, many will find that the novel method of exposition adopted in this volume diverges significantly from their customary modes of forming opinions. Yet, any objection arising therefrom will speedily vanish if one takes the pains to trace those customary methods to their ultimate conclusions. When, through an extended application of disciplined thought, a certain number of these higher mysteries have been assimilated and understood, the appropriate moment has arrived for the methods of occult research to be applied to the seeker's individual personality. These, in turn, will grant him access to the invisible world. Nor will any true scientist discern any contradiction, in spirit or in truth, between empirical science, established upon the phenomena of the sensory world, and the methodology of occult research. The natural scientist employs specific instruments and methods. He constructs his instruments by working upon the raw materials provided by nature. Occult science likewise utilizes an instrument, yet in this instance the instrument is man himself. And this instrument, too, must first be prepared for that elevated domain of research. Those faculties and powers bestowed upon man by nature initially, without his active cooperation, must be transmuted into higher capacities. Thus, man is enabled to fashion himself into an instrument for the investigation of the invisible world. Chapter 2. The Nature of Man. When man is considered in the light of occult science, the significance of this perspective becomes immediately apparent. It is predicated upon the recognition of an element concealed behind that which is revealed to the external senses and to the intellect developed through sensory perception. These senses and this intellect can apprehend but a fraction of that which occult science unveils as the complete human entity. This fraction is the physical body. To elucidate its conception of this physical body, occult science first directs attention to a phenomenon that confronts all observers of life as a profound enigma, the phenomenon of death, and, in connection with it, points to so-called inanimate nature, the mineral kingdom. We are thereby directed to facts that it is the province of occult science to explain, and to which a significant portion of this work must be dedicated. For the purpose of preliminary orientation, however, only a few salient points will be touched upon initially. Within the realm of manifested nature, the physical body, according to occult science, constitutes that part of man which shares the same nature as the mineral kingdom. Conversely, that which distinguishes man from the mineral world is regarded as lying outside the domain of the physical body. From the esoteric perspective, what is of paramount importance is the fact that death separates the human being from that which, during life, is of a nature identical to the mineral world. Occult science designates the corpse as that constituent of man which is found to exist in the same manner as the mineral kingdom. It places strong emphasis upon the fact that in this principle of the human being, which it regards as the physical body, and which death reduces to a corpse, the same substances and forces are active as in the mineral realm. Yet equal emphasis is laid upon the fact that, at death, the disintegration of this physical body commences. Occult science therefore asserts, whilst it is true that the same substances and forces operate within the physical body as in the mineral, during life their activity is subordinated to something higher. They are abandoned to themselves only when death occurs. Thereupon they act, as they must in accordance with their own nature, as the agents of decomposition for the physical body. Thus, a sharp distinction must be drawn between the manifest and the occult elements in man. For during life, that which is concealed from view must wage perpetual warfare against the substances and forces of the mineral world. This indicates the precise juncture at which occult science intervenes. It must characterize the agent of this warfare as a principle hidden from sensory observation. Clairvoyant perception alone can reveal its operations. The manner in which man attains awareness of this hidden element, with a clarity equal to that with which his physical eyes perceive sensory phenomena, will be described in a subsequent portion of this work. The results of clairvoyant observation shall be presented now for the reason already adumbrated in the preceding pages. Namely, that expositions regarding the method of acquiring higher vision can only be of value to the student once he has first become acquainted, by way of narrative, with the fruits of clairvoyant research. For in this domain, it is entirely possible to comprehend phenomena that one is not yet capable of observing. Indeed, the true path to higher vision commences with comprehension. Now, although the hidden entity that opposes the disintegration of the physical body can be observed solely by means of higher sight, its effects are clearly visible to the human faculty of judgment, even when restricted to the manifest world. These effects find expression in the form and structure in which mineral substances and forces are organized during life. Upon the intervention of death, this form gradually vanishes, and the physical body is assimilated into the remainder of the mineral world. The clairvoyant, however, is capable of observing this hidden entity as an independent member of the human organism, which during life prevents physical substances and forces from pursuing their natural course, which would otherwise lead to the dissolution of the physical body. This independent principle is termed the etheric or vital body. Lest misunderstandings arise at the outset, two considerations must be borne in mind regarding this account of a second principle of human nature. The term etheric is employed here in a sense distinct from that of modern physics, which defines ether as the medium through which light is propagated. Within occult science, the application of this term is restricted to the meaning defined above. It denotes that which is accessible to higher vision, and which can be known to physical observation solely through its effects, namely, its capacity to impart a definite form or configuration to the mineral substances and forces present in the physical body. Furthermore, the use of the word body must not be misinterpreted. It is necessary to employ the vocabulary of everyday language when describing phenomena upon a higher plane of existence, though these terms, when applied to sensory observation, express only that which is physical. The etheric body, of course, possesses nothing of a corporeal nature in the physical sense, regardless of how ethereal one might conceive such an entity to be. The moment the occultist introduces this etheric or vital body, they arrive at a juncture where they are inevitably bound to encounter the opposition of many contemporary perspectives. The evolution of the human intellect has been such that any reference to this particular principle of human nature is inevitably regarded as unscientific. Materialistic paradigms of thought have concluded that a living organism presents nothing more than a combination of physical substances and forces analogous to those found in the so-called inanimate mineral realm, with the sole distinction being their greater complexity within the living rather than the lifeless form. Yet, it is not long since alternative views were maintained, even by official science. To anyone who examines the treatises of the many earnest men of science produced during the first half of the 19th century, it is evident that, during that era, many a genuine investigator of nature was conscious of an active factor within the living body distinct from those operating in the lifeless mineral. This was designated as the vital force. It is true that this vital force was not conceptualized as the vital body characterized above. Nevertheless, underlying this notion was a vague apprehension of such an entity's existence. The vital force was generally conceived as an element that, within a living organism, was conjoined with physical matter and forces in a manner analogous to that by which magnetic force unites with iron. Subsequently, a period arrived when the concept of vital force was banished from scientific discourse. Material and chemical causes alone were deemed entirely sufficient. Presently, however, a reaction in this regard is observable in certain scientific circles. It is occasionally conceded that the hypothesis of an element akin to a vital force is not entirely fallacious. Yet, even those scientists who concede this much remain unwilling to align themselves with the occultist concerning the vital body. As a rule, little purpose is served by entering into a dispute over such perspectives from the standpoint of occult science. Rather, it behooves the occultist to recognize that the materialistic mode of thought is an inevitable concomitant of the grand advancement of modern natural science. This progress is attributable to the vast refinements in instruments employed for sensory observation. Furthermore, it is inherent in human nature to cultivate certain faculties to a high degree of perfection at the expense of others. Rigorous sensory observation, which has been developed to such an extraordinary degree by natural science, was bound to relegate to the background the cultivation of those human faculties that lead into the supersensible worlds. Yet, the epoch has arrived when this cultivation is once again imperative, and recognition of the invisible will not be achieved by combating opinions that are the logical consequence of denying its existence, but rather by presenting the invisible in its proper light. Thus, it shall be recognized by those prepared to receive it. It was necessary to elucidate this point so that it might not be assumed that occult science is oblivious to the perspective of natural science when referring to an etheric body, an entity which, in many circles, is inevitably deemed entirely imaginary. Thus, the etheric body constitutes the second principle of the human being. For the clairvoyant, it possesses a higher degree of reality than the physical body itself. A description of its appearance to clairvoyant perception can be provided only in subsequent chapters of this volume, wherein the context for interpreting such descriptions will become apparent. For the present, it suffices to state that the etheric body permeates the physical vehicle in its entirety, and is to be conceptualized as its architect. All physical organs are maintained in their configuration and form by the currents and dynamics of the etheric body. The physical heart is founded upon an etheric heart, the physical brain upon an etheric brain, and the physical structure generally with this distinction, that within the etheric body the parts flow into one another in active motion, whereas in the physical body they are separated from one another. Man shares this etheric body with the entire plant kingdom, just as he shares the physical body with minerals. Every living organism possesses its own etheric body. The investigations of occult science ascend from the etheric body to another principle of the human entity. To facilitate the conception of this principle, attention is directed to the phenomenon of sleep, just as death was examined in relation to the etheric body. All human endeavor within the domain of the manifested world depends upon activity during waking consciousness. Yet, such activity is sustainable only so long as one is capable of replenishing exhausted forces through sleep. Action and thought recede, pain and pleasure fade during slumber, and upon awakening, the conscious faculties of man emerge from the unconsciousness of sleep as if from hidden, mysterious reservoirs of energy. It is the selfsame consciousness that descends into dim depths upon falling asleep and ascends therefrom once more upon awakening. That which reanimates life from this state of unconsciousness is, according to occult science, the third principle of the human being. This is designated as the astral body. Just as the physical body cannot maintain its form solely through the mineral substances and forces it comprises, but must, to preserve its integrity, be interpenetrated by the etheric body, so too is it impossible for the forces of the etheric body to illuminate themselves with the light of consciousness. An etheric body left to its own resources would remain in a state of perpetual sleep. An awake etheric body is illuminated by an astral body. To sensory observation, this astral body appears to vanish when sleep supervenes. To clairvoyant perception, however, it remains present, with the distinction that it appears detached or withdrawn from the etheric body. Sensory observation cannot apprehend the astral body itself, but only its manifestations within the sensible world, and these cease during sleep. In the same manner that man shares his physical body with plants, he resembles the animal kingdom with respect to his astral body. Plants exist in a state of perpetual slumber. An observer who does not discern these matters precisely may easily err by attributing to the plant kingdom the same mode of consciousness possessed by animals and human beings in the waking state. However, this assumption arises solely from an imprecise conception of consciousness. It is often argued that if an external stimulus is applied to a plant, it responds with specific movements analogous to those of an animal. Reference is made to the sensitivity of certain plants, for instance, those that contract their leaves when acted upon by external influences. Yet, the defining characteristic of consciousness is not that an entity reacts in a specific manner to an impression, but rather that it experiences something within its inner nature which introduces a novel element beyond mere reaction. Otherwise, one might speak of consciousness in a piece of iron when it expands under the influence of heat. Consciousness is manifest only when, through the action of heat, the entity experiences pain or pleasure inwardly. The fourth principle of being ascribed to man by occult science is one that he does not share with the remainder of the manifested world. It is this principle which distinguishes him from his fellow creatures and renders him the summit of creation. Occult science assists in forming a conception of this further principle of human nature by directing attention to an essential difference between the modes of experience in waking life. On the one hand, man is perpetually subject to experiences that must of necessity arise and pass away. On the other, he undergoes Do you want access to this and all the complete audiobooks on the channel, plus the ebook version? Click the link in the description or scan the QR code in the left corner of the screen to access our library, where you can listen to your favorite esoteric books without ad interruptions, lock your screen, or use other apps while the narration plays, and even download the ebook version to follow along as you listen. Listen on your computer via web browser, or download the app from the Play Store. After subscribing, you will receive an email with your login details, password, and step-by-step instructions on how to access the books through the Hotmart app.